My name is Dustin Wheeler. My family calls me Duck Duck, and my love of wine created the Duck Vine. The joy and passion I have is a bottle of knowledge I want to share with you. Let me be your favorite sommelier and pour you a big glass of edutainment so you can sit back, swirl it, sniff it, and sip it as we ducks fly together through the wine world. Let's duck and go. Welcome in, everybody, to our newest episode of the Duck Vine. Today, we're going to explore a region of France called the Loire Valley. And as we jump into this, we'll discover an area that is as diverse and complex as any other region can and will be in the world, but especially in France. So let's just jump right in. Loire Valley is kind of like the lore of French wine diversity. It's an interesting region that can be as complicated as Burgundy, but does so with a wide variety of regions and a lot of different types of wine. Most people may not recognize the name of the region or maybe haven't heard of it until I mention one of its most famous citizens. The Loire Valley was home to Joan of Arc. But up until now, most of the time when we've talked about a wine region in France, it was very focused. And we haven't even got to Burgundy's episode yet, which is a deep dive with basically 3 grapes to their name. When we get into the lore, you really start to realize how broad France really gets with its production. Almost every style of wine that we can think of will be made in the Loire Valley. You get your big crisp whites, you get your big reds, you get sparklings on sparklings, the sparkliest of sparklings, and even sweet wines. Part of the reason we see this is just how long the region is, which spans all the way from the Atlantic Ocean all the way inland, and the region follows the Loire River, which is France's largest river, stretching over 634 miles. Fortunately, today, the river is too shallow to allow for commercial shipping, but during the Middle Ages, it was really a key to their success in being noticed as a powerhouse in the wine production. It is also not that far away from Paris as well, so it made it a central hub, especially with this long stretching river that could get their wines not only throughout France, but exported to other countries as well. The most sought after vineyard locations are located on this 300-mile stretch that really flows kind of from the turn coming out of central France towards the ocean. In this area, farthest to the east are Pouilly-Fumé and Sancerre, while if you take a 5-hour car drive, you end up against the Atlantic Ocean at Muscadet. And in between this area, this 300-mile stretch, you can start to see just how complex this one region is. In 300 miles, there are more than 69 official appellations. But the reason why we call this area still the Loire Valley is it's because it's all connected by the Loire River itself. Otherwise, all of these regions could end up in its own kind of subregion and appellation. To really further touch on just how complex this is, the Loire Valley is often talked about in 3 sections: the upper, the middle, and the lower. Personally, for me, I think it makes more sense to think of them as the eastern, the middle, and the western, respectively. We will start to see the deviation in these areas as we go through this episode. But before we get to that part, I really still wanted to kind of point out some important facts. This area in this region really has a unique climate. The river obviously helps keep things a bit cooler, but this is a more northerly area for wine growing and thus has a relatively cool climate. That being said, the wines here, even as diverse as they are, all kind of share a crispness to them, a sense of precision in their character and their flavor because of where they have gotten to with their climate. However, we are starting to see some changes in that. One of the most popular ones that I deal with in a day-to-day business aspect is Sancerre. Sancerre, when we get there, I could really do a whole episode just on like kind of Sancerre and Poulet Fumé in that central region. But what's going on is also making it hard for us to get products here. So if you're a big Sancerre lover, you've already seen this come to fruition in your favorite wine stores because they're having to deal with a lot of climate change and global warming. We're starting to see what we used to associate Sauvignon Blanc, because Sancerre, if you get a white out of Sancerre, is always going to be Sauvignon Blanc, just from the French wine laws. So what's happening is these wines, as the warming effects are happening in the area, are starting to show more qualities that we might associate with an Australian or a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. They're getting fruitier and crispier than what they used to be. They used to be just this kind of gentle, smooth, minerally expression of Sauvignon Blanc. But now, even when you get into blind tasting and studying for some of these SOM exams, this is becoming one of the hardest wines to pinpoint, just because the climate change effect on this area is warming up enough to make it no longer seem like it's French and coming from a much warmer climate. So it's interesting to see that already taking place. But the other thing I want to talk about before we jump into some of the regions of it are some of the wines, the grapes that we'll see around the appellations. So when we get into some of the grapes for this area, we're going to start with the whites. Chardonnay, used all over, used in blends for whites and sparklings. Chenin Blanc, huge player here. Vouvray is an area that you may have seen on the label, so major player. Probably the most important grape coming out of the middle Loire. Poulet Blanc, a little bit more of a minor grape, used to make a wine called Gros Plant in Muscadet, so out on the ocean. Melon de Bourgogne, grape that they used to make Muscadet. Sauvignon Blanc, of course, we've talked about, and we'll talk about forever when we talk about Loire Valley. Whether it stays here or goes away, it has been associated and will always be associated with the Loire. Now, as we jump into reds, Cabernet Franc may be the big one that comes to mind. Chinon is a very distinct region that focuses on Cabernet Franc. A lot of times now, we did have that Cabernet Franc episode, but when we talk about Cabernet Francs, we see it as a minor player. But Chinon is very famous for it. It's a little more graceful coming out of here. You get great pyrazine notes on it. So if you're looking for that, Chinon is a great example of that to go to. You still see some Cabernet Sauvignon used a little bit more as a blend here than where we typically would see it in any other area. Gamay is a big player. Blending great for reds, rosés, sparklings. It's in the middle in the eastern side of the Loire. Pinot Noir, huge in the red wines of Sancerre, which is kind of unique because I think when most people think of Sancerre, we automatically think white and we automatically think Sauvignon Blanc, but Sancerre does produce reds. So it's really interesting to see some of the great makeups here. Now, wine estates in the Loire Valley are generally small, often family owned, and as of 2020, there were nearly 350 negociants, some 20 cooperatives in the Loire. The two leading white grapes of the Loire Valley, Sauvignon Blanc and Chenin Blanc, both originated in Loire Valley, and as both have Sauvignon as a parent, which is not the same grape as Sauvignon Blanc. Um, there are most likely like siblings or half siblings, but for its part, Sauvignon Blanc has gone on and inspired so many regions: New Zealand, Austria. Chenin Blanc, though, is a different story. It was a grape that was spread out for a while, but has seemingly kind of come back and found its home really in two places. In Vouvray, the classic example of what Chenin Blanc is, but you can still find some really good top producers out of South Africa as well. Most of the lower reds and rosés, like I said, are made from the Cabernet Franc. Um, and you get some Gamay in there as well with a little bit of Pinot Noir and some Cab Sauv sinking around. The lower reds are unmistakably stamped by their northern climate. They're zesty, they're vivid, they appreciate precisely because of their energy that they put out. They're fresh. They're not weighty or kind of like so full bodied that it sticks to your ribs almost. But it's a really interesting take on the grapes that they have here. As we get into these regions that we talked about earlier, the Eastern Loire is about 300 miles from the Atlantic coast, but it's less than half the distance of that to Paris. The main regions coming out of here are Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé, and are accordingly well known to France's capital as they are worldwide. Loire Sauvignon Blancs are in no way mundane or ordinary. They're racy, they're flinty, they're tangy, they're stony, chalky. They are some of the best example of Sauvignon Blanc, and really kind of pay homage to Sauvignon's root, meaning untamed. They really get some great expressions here. They're the world's model for pure, nervy, pinpoint focus, intense Sauvignon Blancs, and are considered really some of the best whites to match foods for. I am not a goat cheese fan, but give me Sauvignon Blanc and goat cheese. There's nothing better. Just as a note here, most Sauvignon Blancs here are stainless steel. They do not go under malolactic fermentation unless they're like some really special cuvées or reserve things that a winemaker may just want to do for fun. They really want you to get the expression of the grape and the earth and the terroir here. They don't want to influence the flavor of Sauvignon Blanc. The middle Loire is where it can get especially confusing because there's so many, and even at times appellations that their borders intersect with each other and cross over, as well as the wine styles. When you try to really break down the Loire Valley and really study it, not only just for fun but to become a student of wine, this is one of the areas, at least for me, that tripped me up the most because of just how diverse and long this region is and everything that's going on. So in the middle Loire, this is where some of the best rosés, the reds, are coming out of from Anjou and Chinon. And you do get some great sparkling wines from Cremant de Loire. If you do see whites out of here, they're going to be dry. Sometimes like a little bit of medium sweet, unless you go into Vouvray, where you can get some sweet examples of Chenin Blanc. There's a particular winemaker that I've followed, and he is dedicated his whole life to Chenin Blanc. All he makes is Chenin Blanc, but he makes about 9 different cuvées of Chenin Blanc, from as dry as can be to sparkling to as sweet. It's really interesting to see one grape just portrayed so diversely from one maker. It's really unique how well of a job he does at just expressing that grape in so many different varieties. He also has a winery in South Africa as well. So he has two, and both wineries, all he does is Chenin Blanc. Really interesting. So while several grape varieties are grown in the middle Loire, um, it's really kind of broken down to Chenin Blanc for the whites and Cabernet Franc for the reds. The middle Loire is divided into two broad areas known as Anjou Samar and then Touraine. Anjou Samar is on the west side near Angers, includes Sauniers, and from this area on the west, you end up with only white wines. If you go into Touraine, near the city of Tours, you do get Chinon. So you'll get to see some of the red production here, as well as this is where Vouvray is located. So if you ever do make a trip over to the Loire Valley, keep that in mind. So Muscadet, the western Loire, it is the most western part of the Loire. It is right up against the Atlantic Ocean. It's cold, it's wet, and it's really kind of known for one wine, Muscadet. It is the leading wine of the Loire by Valley. I think sometimes when we hear Muscadet, people think Muscat, especially in the continental U.S., which is a very sweet wine. But here, this is a dry, lean, fresh. They stainless steel ferment this white. That it's made to drink. It's not this super overdone, complicated wine. It's something that they just want to put out for you to grab a bottle, get some good food, sit down at a table, and enjoy some great conversation over a bottle of wine. Muscadet's claim to fame has been forever how easy it is to pair with seafood, which makes sense, sitting right up against the ocean. And if you think of something like mussels with this French wine, perfect pairing. Muscadet is made from melon de Bourgogne and is often referred to simply as melon. And I think, again, as Americans, we see that, and we might be like tricked into thinking like, oh, melon, sweet melons, it's going to be a sweet. It's not. And of course, Bourguignon is referring to Burgundy, not the Loire, due to a frost that happened in 1709, which destroyed most of Loire's vineyards. And afterwards, the Burgundian monks came and helped replant the vineyards, bringing local frost healthy, like Burgundy variety, the Melon de Bourgogne. The DNA analysis indicates the grape is actually a cross of Pinot Blanc and Gouzet's Blanc. So the monks really saved the wine production here in Loire, and so they have named the grape with those monks in mind as kind of a little nod for what they did to save their industry there. As of the early 18th century, though, the grape was forbidden in Burgundy in favor of Chardonnay. So there is no more melon in Burgundy. So it's really this kind of unique history story where it saved one region, but another region kind of turned its back on it and is no longer around in that area. So let's do a quick recap and touch on everything that we've really kind of learned today. So, signature characteristics of the Loire Valley. All Loire wines have that zesty crispness to them. The Loire is one of the largest and most diverse wine regions in France. Virtually, like we said, every type of wine is made here. From stills to sparklings, from dries to sweet, ripe reds and rosés. Leading grapes of the Loire: Chenin Blanc, Sauvignon Blancs for your whites, and then, of course, Cabernet Franc coming in for your reds. It's an area that covers a vast amount of mileage from the sea to the inland, all based off of one river that connects them all and really builds the relationship that is the Loire Valley. We talk about the Loire Valley as it's this one entity that we could sit down and chat about and bring up a couple of things. But as you started to see in this episode, and really why I'm not diving in full headstrong into this, is all these little areas that we've talked about, from the east to the central to the west, really have all these unique stories and even more detailed expressions of what they present to the wine world. And as us as wine lovers, can be a place where you could just sit and study. I know a lot of people, when they talk about French wine, they go, oh, you could spend a lifetime learning about Burgundy. And you really can. It's very complex, but it's also very simple in a sense. Burgundy really revolves around three grapes and three main grapes. And what it really comes down to is all these little unique plots of land. But the Loire is this huge area that spans quite a bit of distance that's really connected just through a waterway. But when we get into those little individual nuances, creates almost its own region in itself. That's why we can say Chinon and Pouilly-Fumé and Vouvray and Sancerre are also completely different and have such complexity to them, but are all still connected at the same time. It's really a unique area, and it's not only is it gorgeous, but has so much to offer. If it was me personally, I would love to just spend a year in the Loire, just really exploring every kind of nook and cranny over some of the other regions that we know time and time again. If you type in French wine, your first couple hits are going to be Burgundy, Bordeaux, Champagne, the big hitters. But I think the little characteristics that you might not expect from French wine can be seen here in this region. So if you do see a Loire Valley on a label, or you see one of these regions we've talked about today, don't be afraid to step out your comfort zone. You're going to get really high quality stuff coming from here. I really encourage you to go out and explore on your own and really take some time to get to know the Loire Valley. So appreciate you guys, as always, tuning in, downloading the podcast, telling your friends. If you like this, I think as we go down the road, you'll see a more microscopic view of the Loire Valley, and we can get into these regions and really kind of dissect them and talk on some of the top producers and what they're really offering in these unique wines. But continue to spread the word. Everything that you guys do to support us here at the Duck Vine, it means so much to me and my family. Also, check out our social media, the Duck Vine on Twitter and Instagram, where you can keep up with latest news, as well as photos that'll highlight each of the episodes that we release. So I appreciate you guys. I hope you had fun. I hope you learned something. But the most important thing is we got to drink some wine.